A man slams his brakes on a quiet highway, then stares into a torn cardboard box lying by the road. Inside, a dying German shepherd, barely breathing, three puppies clinging to her like it's their last chance at life. But what he uncovers next involves secret labs, genetic mutations, and a cover-up that could shake the entire country. Why was she left there? Who tried to erase her? And how far would you go to protect something that can't speak? This isn't just a rescue. It's a war for truth, waged quietly, between a retired man, a forgotten dog, and a system built to discard both. Watch their story. And ask yourself, if you were him, would you have stopped the car? Cleveland in winter had a way of holding its breath past midnight. The city lights blurred into a pale haze as fog crept through the alleyways and over empty parking lots, swallowing the cracked pavement like time-consuming memory. On the fringe of a weathered industrial district, tucked between a long shuttered body shop and a chain-link fence draped in frost, stood the small brick house of Ethan Reed, a man whom the world had all but forgotten. At 63, Ethan bore the look of someone who had lived his years in calloused labor and quiet solitude. His hands, once strong from decades of automotive work, were slower now, veins like raised rivers under pale, dry skin. His back curved slightly with age and wear, and his beard, once dark and wiry, had grown soft and silver, trimmed neatly though no longer for anyone but himself. His eyes, deep-set and steel blue, carried stories he didn't often tell. Since the death of his wife in a fire 12 years ago and the departure of his only son to another state, Ethan had spoken more to tools than people. He found companionship in the click of wrenches and the hum of an old radio that rarely left the local country station. That night, Ethan had fallen asleep on his recliner, a space heater humming near his feet. A book lay open on his chest, glasses tilted sideways on the bridge of his nose. Then came the sound, soft, uneven. A whimper, maybe. It didn't come from inside. He blinked once, twice, listening. Another cry, sharper this time, a small voice cut from the silence. Instinct moved his body before thought caught up. He grabbed the flashlight near the door, shoved his boots on over mismatched socks, and stepped into the cold. The air outside bit through his flannel shirt. His breath clouded in front of him as he moved toward the back alley that ran behind the abandoned repair garage next door. The whimpering grew louder. His flashlight beam, jittery from an aging hand, swept across broken crates and rusted oil drums. And then, it landed on a cardboard box. Inside, curled tightly around three shivering bodies, was a German shepherd. Her fur was matted, streaked with dirt, her ribs painfully visible beneath skin that clung too tightly to bone. Her eyes, amber and glassy, looked up at him with an exhausted mixture of fear and hope. Her right hind leg was swollen and slightly raised. She was wounded. Protectively, her body curled around three small puppies, barely more than a week old. One didn't seem to be breathing well. Ethan crouched, letting the beam fall gently on them. "Easy, girl," he murmured, voice rough like gravel. "I'm not here to hurt you." The mother didn't growl. She didn't move, just looked. That look stayed with him, like something ancient and pleading had leapt across the divide between species. He reached slowly, his movements practiced, and touched the edge of the box. The puppies whimpered softly. The cold had stiffened their tiny limbs. They wouldn't last the night. He lifted the box with effort, holding it close to his chest, letting their warmth press against him. The German shepherd whimpered again, as if apologizing for not resisting. "We'll get you somewhere warm," Ethan said, more to himself than to them. Back inside, he laid them on a pile of old towels near the heater. He filled a bowl with warm water and tore up a slice of bread into small pieces. The mother sniffed the bread, hesitant, but the growl of her stomach overcame fear. She ate slowly, still watching Ethan with weary eyes. He gently checked her leg. It wasn't broken, but inflamed, possibly infected. The puppy that had seemed weaker began coughing, a tiny rasping sound that chilled him more than the wind outside. He looked at the mother again. "You're a tough one," he whispered. "Nova. That's what I'll call you." It felt right. Across the street, in a modest duplex with a string of paper lanterns still hung from a past celebration, Liana Tran sat at her dining table, a laptop open, her fingers shaking as she scrolled through medical records. Liana was 25, Vietnamese American, with a sharp, intelligent face softened by fatigue. Her long black hair was pulled into a loose bun, and dark circles bloomed beneath her eyes, marks of too many double shifts and sleepless nights. She was a registered nurse at St. Mary's General, a hospital known more for its efficiency than its ethics. Recently, a troubling pattern had emerged. Dogs brought in for behavioral studies, rescued supposedly, were dying under strange circumstances. The paperwork didn't match. Doses were wrong. Liana had voiced her concerns, but her supervisor waved her off. "You're new. You don't understand how these things work." But Liana had seen the records. The same names appeared across multiple cases. All the animals tagged as rescued, all from a defunct facility labeled BG Labs. Something wasn't right. Behind her, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Did you feed Bao yet?" It was her mother, Mrs. Tran, thin and frail in a threadbare sweater, her once brilliant mind now trapped in a fog of Parkinson's and dementia. Liana stood quickly and guided her back to bed. "He's fine, Mama. He ate already." Each night was like this, a cycle of care, worry, and silent questions. Liana loved her mother fiercely, but the burden was growing. And tonight, for the first time, she felt a thread between the chaos at the hospital and something deeper. The file she had just opened contained the name of a new shipment. GSD litter, 3 pups, 1 female, tagged. She stared at it. German Shepherd. Could it be? As dawn approached, the fog outside began to lift. In Ethan's home, Nova lay curled around her pups, asleep for the first time in what was likely days. Ethan sat nearby, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching them with a quiet protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what kind of trouble these dogs carried with them, but something in his bones told him that they hadn't just been abandoned. They'd been discarded. For a reason. And across the street, Liana stared at the same fog, unaware that the cries Ethan heard were about to change her life too. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Ethan Reed's modest living room, casting a hazy golden hue over the tangle of blankets on the floor. There, nestled beside a space heater humming steadily, lay Nova, the German Shepherd he had found the night before, curled protectively around her 3 puppies. Her breathing had steadied, though her eyes remained alert, flicking toward any sound. Ethan sat a few feet away in a worn-out armchair, holding a cup of reheated coffee, watching them with a gaze that had softened overnight into something bordering on affection. Nova was still painfully thin, her fur a patchwork of dirt and shedding, but she was beautiful in a quiet, fierce way. She had a large, angular head with intelligent amber eyes and ears that perked sharply at the slightest movement. Her body bore signs of both strength and suffering. The swelling in her hind leg hadn't gone down, and one of the pups, smaller than the rest, with a black spot on its chest, had begun to wheeze. Ethan had taken to calling that one Brio, after a model of motorbike he used to work on, small but full of fire. Brio didn't have much fire left. He coughed in short bursts, his tiny ribs trembling with the effort. Nova licked his face gently and looked up at Ethan with a helplessness that pained him more than he expected. Ethan placed the coffee down and stood, knees popping. He grabbed the phone from the counter and began dialing numbers from a dog rescue flyer pinned to his fridge. The first went to voicemail. The second answered, but apologized. "We're full. No foster homes left this week." The third didn't even ring. Every call ended the same. No space, no staff, no help. Ethan rubbed his face and stared at the sleeping dogs. "Guess it's up to us, girl," he muttered. It had been years since he'd seen Arlo Nguyen, but there weren't many people Ethan trusted. Arlo had once been the city's most respected vet, calm, methodical, and never one to sugarcoat the truth. He retired 2 years ago after a car accident left him with a permanent limp and a scar along his jaw that made him look sterner than he really was. Still, he worked part-time from a small clinic behind his house, mostly for neighbors or the occasional stray. Ethan hadn't spoken to him since the funeral of Ethan's wife, but some people never really fall out of your life. They just go quiet for a while. Ethan dialed Arlo's number. It rang twice. "Nguyen," came the familiar voice, short and clipped. "It's Ethan," he said. A pause. "You alive?" "Barely," Ethan replied. "I need a favor. It's a dog." Arlo sighed audibly but didn't hang up. "Bring it by. Back entrance." Ethan looked down at Brio, who had started coughing again. "I'll be there in 20." Across the street, in the dim second-floor bedroom of the Tron residence, Liana Tron sat beside her mother's bed, gently helping the frail woman adjust her blanket. Mrs. Tran, once a sharp-witted librarian with a soft voice and a love for 19th-century Russian novels, had been reduced to fragments. At 68, her gray hair was always pulled back in a tight bun, out of habit more than style. Her face bore the fine lines of intellect and worry, her eyes distant except in rare moments of clarity. That morning, Liana had brought her mother tea when she suddenly murmured, "Did you see them? The ones with the collars?" Liana froze. Her mother continued, barely a whisper. "We were told not to file them. The canines from the labs. Biogenesis. That's what they called it." Then silence. Her eyes closed. Her hand went limp. Liana sat back, stunned. She had heard the name before, on documents, invoices at work that didn't match anything in the public database. She rushed to the hallway closet, rummaging through boxes of old papers and binders from when her mother had worked at a university library. After half an hour, she found them, loose pages in a cracked leather folder. Most were research abstracts and genetic diagrams, but stamped in the corner of several was the same faded blue logo, BG Labs. Her hands trembled as she flipped through sketches of canine anatomy, charts of chromosomal sequences, and a document labeled Canis Variant G8. No names, no dates, just a project number. She took photos of everything with her phone, her nurse's instincts blending with something far more personal now. Could this be what her mother had been afraid of? And were those dogs, Ethan's dogs, somehow connected? At the back entrance of Arlo's small clinic, Ethan knocked twice before pushing through the door. The building smelled like antiseptic and sawdust. The main room was lined with old kennels, and a metal examination table stood beneath a flickering overhead light. Arlo limped out from a side hallway, his salt and pepper hair pulled back in a low ponytail, his lab coat half-buttoned. He looked the same, though thinner, the scar down his left jaw pulling slightly when he frowned. "You look like crap," he said by way of greeting. "Good to see you too." Ethan set the box down. Arlo approached, eyes narrowing as he took in the sight. "German Shepherd? She's been through hell." "She had 3 pups with her. This one's struggling," Ethan said, indicating Brio. Arlo bent down slowly, his limp causing a subtle shift in his stance. He touched Brio's chest and frowned. "Congenital defect, maybe. Could be respiratory. I'll need to run some scans. The mother, she's young, maybe 3 years old, but this leg's infected, and she's malnourished." He looked up at Ethan. "Where'd you find them?" Ethan explained briefly. The alley, the cold, the box. Arlo nodded but said nothing for a while. Then he gestured toward the exam room. "I'll take it from here. Sit if you want. I'll call you when I've got something." Ethan sat in silence, hands folded tightly, listening to the quiet hum of the clinic and the occasional whimper of Brio from the back. He hadn't felt this helpless in years. Back at her apartment, Liana spread the documents across her desk and started comparing the data to case files at the hospital. She recognized one symbol repeated over and over, a stylized G inside a circle. She opened her search engine and typed in BG Labs plus Biogenesis plus Canine Trial plus G8. Nothing concrete. But then, a result on page 6. A veterinary lawsuit in a neighboring state citing unethical breeding experiments involving undocumented gene splicing. Dogs discarded, records buried. She leaned back, heart racing. Something dark was hiding behind corporate silence. And if what her mother had said was true, she might be sitting on a key to exposing it. But first, she needed to see the dogs herself. At the clinic, Ethan stood beside the steel table. Arlo returned, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Brio needs more than fluids. We'll have to start antibiotics tonight. I'll keep him here. The mother can stay too. I'll clear the back room." Ethan nodded. "Let me know if anything changes." He paused before leaving, watching Nova as she pressed her muzzle to the glass of Brio's small kennel. Her eyes, still tired, met his. There was something familiar in that look, a silent vow. The wind swept low across the Cleveland streets, tugging at rusted gutters and whistling through cracked alley bricks, as if the city itself were holding a breath it didn't know it had drawn. Inside Arlo Nguyen's modest clinic, tucked between a boarded-up laundromat and a discount liquor store, something far quieter but far more disturbing was unfolding beneath the dim light of a surgical lamp. Nova lay sedated on the stainless steel exam table, her side rising and falling slowly, a thick blanket draped over her fragile frame. Beside her, one of her pups, Brio, slept in a heated kennel, his breathing irregular but stable for now. Ethan stood nearby, arms crossed tightly over his chest, the deep furrows in his forehead betraying the storm behind his normally calm expression. Arlo, hunched over the scan monitor, adjusted his glasses and grunted quietly to himself. The old veterinarian looked more scholar than surgeon in that moment, his graying ponytail tied tight, lab coat wrinkled, and eyes moving rapidly between lines of data. The small chip he had extracted from beneath Nova's skin now lay inside a sealed petri dish, its casing cracked and scorched at one end, clearly tampered with. "She had a tracker," Arlo said without looking up. Ethan stepped forward. "A microchip," Arlo nodded. "But this isn't the kind used for pet ID. This one was military grade, modified. It's been burned, likely to erase its signal. Someone didn't just abandon her, they tried to erase her." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "You think she escaped from somewhere?" Arlo didn't answer right away. He clicked through a set of digital x-rays. "That's not all. Take a look at this." He pointed to a scan of one of the puppies. Brio's skeletal structure was slightly asymmetrical. "Jaw development's off. Teeth are erupting in patterns I haven't seen. And see the eyes?" He pulled up a close-up photo taken earlier. "Mismatched irises. Genetic mosaicism. I've only seen this in labs, and only when people are screwing around with things they shouldn't be." "You think they've been altered?" Ethan asked quietly. Arlo leaned back, arms folded. These pups weren't just bred, they were engineered. Poorly. Ethan's chest tightened. He looked at Nova, unconscious, limp on the table. Something about the scars on her ears and the way she curled around her puppies the night before came back to him. She wasn't just a stray. She was a survivor. "I don't care what they've done to her," Ethan said, voice low but certain. "They're family now. We fix what we can." Arlo looked over at his old friend and gave a rare smile, half admiration, half resignation. "Then we better start digging, because if they come looking for her, I want to know who they are before they knock on your door." Later that day, the bell above the front door chimed softly as Liana Tran stepped inside the clinic. Her presence was like a contrast to the room, young, precise, and alert. She wore scrubs beneath a winter coat 2 sizes too big for her petite frame, and a canvas tote bag hung from one shoulder, stuffed with folders and loose papers. Her black hair was tied in a messy low bun, a few strands falling around her face. "I'm looking for Dr. Nguyen," she asked, glancing around. Arlo emerged from the back, still drying his hands. "You found him, and I don't do emergency walk-ins anymore, unless it's bleeding or barking." "I'm not here with a dog," she said, then paused. "Well, actually, I kind of am, but more in theory." Ethan looked up from the corner, surprised. "You're the nurse from across the street." Liana offered a faint smile. "And you're the guy who suddenly got a German shepherd and puppies at his feet." Arlo raised an eyebrow. "You two know each other?" "Neighbors," Ethan said simply. Liana stepped forward and set the tote bag on the counter, pulling out a thick manila folder. "I think something's wrong at the hospital. We've had at least 5 dogs die in the past 3 weeks, all from the same rescue channel. No paperwork that matches up. I checked. And this," she pulled out several pages with scientific annotations. "This came from my mother's files. She used to work in the library department at a biotech research company, Biogenesis Pet Labs. It was shut down a few years ago under unclear circumstances." Arlo's face tightened at the name. "You've heard of them," she said, more a statement than a question. Arlo nodded slowly. "They ran something called the Canis variant G8 trials. It was supposed to be gene therapy for working dogs, stronger muscles, resistance to disease, but it was never approved. Too many adverse outcomes. Then they vanished." Liana tapped the edge of one page. "There's a chemical compound mentioned here, VX 207. It's marked for restricted use, only allowed in preclinical genetic manipulation. And last week, our lab manager signed off on a shipment of VX 207 for use in a behavioral study." Arlo took the paper from her, reading closely. "This shouldn't be in a hospital. This shouldn't be anywhere near live animals anymore. Ethan frowned. So what does this mean for Nova and her pups? Liana looked between the two men. If they are connected to this project, they're evidence, living evidence. If someone's trying to bury this, they'll want them gone, Arlo finished grimly. That night, Ethan returned home to a quiet house, but the silence no longer felt empty. He'd moved the largest dog crate into his living room, lined with blankets and soft towels. Nova had recovered well from sedation, and now lay curled again with her pups. Brio was quieter than usual, but his eyes followed Ethan as he moved. The connection was undeniable. Ethan pulled a photo off the bookshelf. His late wife in a summer dress, standing beside their old Dodge with a mutt named Whiskey between them. He stared at it for a long moment, then turned to Nova. "We've done this before," he said quietly. "We can do it again." Outside, the wind howled against the windows, but inside the little house, the light stayed on late into the night as Ethan read through every document Liana had left him. If these dogs were part of something bigger, something dark, he needed to be ready. He didn't know who was out there yet, but he knew where they were going to come. The morning came cloaked in a heavy gray mist, the kind that settled low over rooftops and muffled the sound of everything except memory. Inside his small kitchen, Ethan Reed stood at the window, a chipped mug of black coffee cooling in his hand. Beyond the condensation-streaked glass, the world seemed still, but inside him, something churned. Brio hadn't eaten since the night before. His breathing had grown shallow, his little chest rising and falling with the weight of invisible struggle. Ethan had seen that kind of breath before, on the living room floor of his old house, when the phone call came. The voice on the other end had been calm, professional. His son, Caleb, had died in the line of duty. A warehouse blaze, collapsed beam, no time to escape. They said he didn't suffer, but Ethan knew better. Grief had a sound, soft, gasping, just like Brio's now. He set the mug down and turned toward the crate in the living room. Nova lay curled protectively around her pups. Her eyes flicked up as Ethan approached, always watchful. Brio was closest to her, his fur slightly damp with sweat, mouth barely open, a faint whimper escaping every few breaths. The clinic visit the day before had confirmed it, a congenital heart defect. Arlo had shown him the scan, an irregular valve, underdeveloped and growing worse by the hour. Brio would need surgery. Not next week, not soon, now. Ethan crouched beside the crate, his knees cracking with the effort. He reached in and gently stroked Brio's fur. "You've got some fight left in you," he whispered. But inside, he was already calculating. The cost of the surgery, the medication, the follow-ups. The last time he checked, the quote was in the low four figures, and Ethan wasn't a rich man. He lived off a modest pension and some occasional repair work from neighbors who still remembered his good days. His eyes drifted toward the garage. Covered in dust, behind a stack of rusted toolboxes, sat a 1966 Chevrolet Impala, his retirement project, and one of the few things he had left of Caleb. They'd started restoring it together, father and son, over long weekends and quiet summer evenings. It hadn't run in years, but the body was solid, the bones good. It would fetch a fair price from the right collector. He stood slowly, the weight of the decision already settled in his bones. Across town, in a cramped newsroom that still smelled faintly of ink and cold coffee, Ben Rosario sat hunched over a computer screen, fingers flying across the keyboard. A wiry man in his early 40s with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a habit of muttering his thoughts aloud, Ben had the look of someone who hadn't taken a proper vacation in a decade. His dark brown eyes, rimmed with fatigue, were sharp with the kind of suspicion that only came from years chasing shadows other reporters wouldn't touch. Liana sat across from him, documents spread out between them. Printouts, screenshots, and the old handwritten notes from her mother's archive. She tapped one page in particular, where a logo had been half erased by time but still recognizable. Biogenesis. Ben whistled low. "You're sure about this?" "I cross-referenced the substance orders with our hospital's procurement records," Liana said. "The VX-207 compound was ordered under a behavioral study license, but it's not meant for use on any animal still in development. That's illegal." Ben leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "I've been tracking Biogenesis for 6 months. They disappeared after their license was revoked, but I kept seeing trails, orders through shell companies, anonymous drops to obscure research labs. And now you're telling me there's a live subject tied to their G8 line across the street from your house. More than one, she corrected. The mother. 3 pups, one's dying. The mother had a wiped tracker. Arlo's clinic has them now. Ben nodded slowly. Cleveland Research Unit, he muttered. That's the name I keep circling back to. They claim to specialize in canine behavior studies for law enforcement training, but their funding doesn't match their output, and they've been quietly buying gene mapping equipment that shouldn't be in private hands. Liana handed him another sheet. Financial transaction log, a payment from Biogenesis to CRU, 3 months before the lab lost its license. Ben's eyebrows rose. This might be bigger than either of us thought. Then we need to protect the dogs, she said. If they're living proof, someone's going to want to erase them. Ben stood and grabbed his coat. I'm going with you. Let's talk to Arlo. Later that afternoon, Ethan rolled up the garage door for the first time in months. The winter sun bounced off the Impala's faded red hood, illuminating years of dust and memory. He traced a finger along the fender, feeling the ridges of time, the dents they never got around to fixing. He called Harold Muntz, a retired collector who lived on the outskirts of town. Harold was in his 70s, thin as a twig, and always dressed like he was attending a country fair, complete with suspenders and a sun-faded cowboy hat. He arrived in under an hour, stepping out of his battered Ford pickup with the gait of a man who had broken his hip once and decided not to let it slow him down. You sure about this? Harold asked, eyeing the car with genuine reverence. Ethan nodded. It's for a dog. Harold tilted his head. Well, that's a damn fine reason. They shook hands on it. Cash was exchanged. Ethan watched the Impala roll onto the tow truck, the memory of his son in the passenger seat flashing like a ghost. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in years, but something inside him shifted, like a chapter turning. At Arlo's clinic, the meeting was already underway when Ethan arrived with the envelope of cash. Nova perked up as he entered, tail thumping weakly against the crate wall. Liana introduced Ben, who gave Ethan a quick rundown of what they'd uncovered. Biogenesis, CRU, the financial links, the chemicals, the erased records. They're using abandoned medical licensing to hide illegal gene work, Ben said. Nova and her pups are probably part of a test run. Disposable assets. Only she wasn't disposed of cleanly. Ethan nodded slowly, then handed Arlo the envelope. It's enough, right? Arlo weighed it in his hand, surprised. Where'd this come from? I had something worth selling. The vet didn't ask. He just placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Then we prep Brio tonight. Surgery in the morning. Liana moved closer to the crate and knelt beside Nova. We'll fight this, she whispered to the dog. For all of you. Nova responded with a soft nuzzle to her hand. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. But in that small, overworked clinic on the edge of town, a new light had started to burn, fueled by memory, sacrifice, and a rising sense that something much larger was just beginning. The morning after Brio's diagnosis dawned brittle and sharp, with a sky the color of old aluminum and wind that sliced through the alleyways like glass. Cleveland wore its winter like a shroud, and the air smelled faintly of snow, though none had fallen. Ethan pulled into the empty street behind Arlo's clinic in his battered Dodge Caravan, engine coughing like an old smoker. In the back seat, swaddled in blankets and curled up like a comma, Brio barely stirred. He was taking no chances. Arlo had arranged for a specialist to perform the surgery at a private animal hospital across town. Timing was crucial. The moment Brio had shown signs of respiratory distress again, Ethan had moved. But what he hadn't expected, what froze his gut with something far colder than January wind, was the dark SUV that appeared in his rearview mirror the second he left the parking lot. Matte black, no front plate, windows tinted darker than factory default. At first, he thought it might just be a coincidence. Then it turned when he turned, kept the same distance, never overtook him, never slowed, just followed. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He changed lanes suddenly. Then again, running the lightest of yellows. The SUV mirrored his every move. His mind raced. The dogs, Nova, and her pups. They weren't just random strays. That much was clear now. Brio was proof of a crime, a living exhibit of malpractice, and someone wanted him gone. He made a snap decision and veered sharply off the main road, heading toward the industrial fringe, a maze of garages and abandoned warehouses. His breath quickened as he passed the familiar rust-colored wall of a shuttered machine shop, then turned into the cracked driveway of Mickey Dell's Auto, a place he hadn't visited in over 5 years. Mickey, a stout man in his early 60s with oil-stained hands and a permanent scowl carved into his wind-burnt face, stepped out from under a lifted Toyota as Ethan pulled in. His salt and pepper hair was matted to his forehead, and his eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Well, I'll be damned," Mickey grunted. "The hell are you doing here, Reed?" "Long story," Ethan said, throwing the van in park. "You got space inside?" Mickey glanced at the SUV now slowly passing the entrance like a shark tasting blood. "Inside. Now." They backed the van into the garage, the old rolling door groaning as it came down. Ethan jumped out and immediately opened the side door to check on Brio. The pup was breathing, but slow. Too slow. "Jesus," Mickey muttered, peering into the van. "That's a German Shepherd puppy?" "One of 4, Ethan said grimly. "He's the only one sick. Needs surgery. Doesn't look like the kind of mutt you find under a porch." "They're not." Across the city, in the sterile silence of the newsroom's back office, Ben Rosario stared at his monitor with the kind of intensity reserved for predators. His screen was split between 2 windows. One, a document in PDF format labeled Pet Shield Insurance Group Internal Policy Summary, and the other, a spreadsheet of payouts to veterinary clinics across 3 states. A coffee mug with the words, "Journalism is printing what someone else doesn't want." Printed steamed quietly beside him. There it was again. Same pattern. Multiple rescue dogs signed in under fabricated shelter names. Identical diagnoses. All euthanized within 72 hours of arrival. And yet, insurance payouts had been issued. Large ones. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. PetShield had ties to several biotech labs, including one listed under a shell company that matched Biogenesis's last known address. The names were different, but the players? The money trail was undeniable. It was a front. They were laundering money under the guise of failed veterinary rescues. He picked up his phone. "Liana, you better come see this." At the same time, Liana Tron stood in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by stacks of old binders and paper-stuffed boxes. Her mother, Mrs. Tron, was asleep in the next room, soft wheezes signaling dreams blurred by dementia. Liana had found what she didn't know she was looking for, an employee termination notice, dated 3 years ago, her mother's name. The reason? Compromise of proprietary information. Attached was a single-page letter, no logo, no letterhead. Just a name. Dr. Charles Kerman, CRU. Liana's blood ran cold. She opened her laptop, her fingers trembling. She accessed the encrypted form she'd used once during nursing school to share whistleblower concerns. This time, she uploaded 4 documents: the termination letter, the shredded financial link between Biogenesis and PetShield, a redacted list of chemical supplies, and the Canis variant G8 chart. She didn't sign her name. She didn't have to. Under the heading, she wrote only, "They're still doing it, and now they're killing to cover it up." Back in Mickey's garage, the sound of sirens echoed somewhere in the distance as Ethan gently lifted Brio into a portable carrier lined with flannel. Mickey watched him with the stoicism of someone who'd seen too many good dogs put down by bad men. "You still driving to the hospital?" he asked. "Yeah, I just needed a safe stop." Mickey handed him a set of keys. "Take my truck. That van sticks out like a sore thumb now." Ethan blinked. "You sure?" Mickey gave him a look. "You think I'm gonna let some corporate thug take out a dog on my watch?" Ethan didn't smile, but his eyes, for the first time that day, softened. Minutes later, he drove off in the beat-up green Chevy pickup, tires screeching faintly as he turned toward the west side. The SUV was nowhere in sight. By the time Ethan arrived at the animal hospital, Brio had begun to cry faintly again, which, paradoxically, gave Ethan hope. Sound was good. Stillness was worse. The receptionist, a sharp-eyed woman named Camille, took one look at the pup and rushed them back. Camille was in her early 40s, tall, slim, with auburn hair pulled into a tight French braid. Her movements were precise, almost military. She had a softness, though, hidden behind a wall of clinical efficiency. A divorce 5 years ago had left her guarded, and her love for animals was, as she often said, the only thing that makes sense. Dr. Harland, A barrel-chested surgeon with silver temples and the brisk confidence of someone who never second-guessed a scalpel, examined Brio and agreed to operate immediately. "You got someone waiting at home?" he asked Ethan as Brio was wheeled away. "Just a dog," Ethan replied. Dr. Harlan nodded. "That counts." Hours later, the surgery was done. Brio had made it through, stable, fragile, but alive. Ethan sat in the recovery room, Nova's leash in his hand. He had brought her in once the coast was clear. She hadn't barked, she hadn't growled, but when the vet tech, an older male, reached toward her kennel, she flattened her ears and backed into a corner, her eyes wild. Ethan understood. Some wounds weren't on the body. Nova only calmed when Ethan knelt beside her, speaking gently, repeating the same words over and over. "He's okay. He's okay. You kept him alive." She nuzzled his hand, and for a moment, it felt like more than gratitude. It felt like understanding. That evening, while Ethan stayed with Brio and Nova at the clinic, the first article dropped on the anonymous network. Then the second. Then an expose from a former lab assistant who confirmed the G8 trials had never been shut down, only rebranded. Within hours, hashtags began appearing. #Justice for Nova. #No more discarded lives. #the G8 cover-up. And so, beneath the neon lights of a city too busy to notice most things, a spark was lit. It didn't roar yet, but it burned. The rain came without warning, hard, cold, and punishing. It drummed against the roof of Arlo Nguyen's clinic like 1,000 urgent knocks, relentless and echoing in the sterile, quiet halls. Inside the small examination room, Arlo stood beneath the glow of an overhead lamp, a blood sample spinning in a small centrifuge behind him. The hum of machines filled the silence, but Ethan's attention was fixed solely on Brio. The pup lay on a heated blanket, his breathing shallow, nose dry, and eyes half-lidded. Ethan crouched nearby, one hand resting on Nova's back. The German Shepherd had not left Brio's side since their return from the hospital. Her posture was tense, tail still, ears tilted back with an unshakable wariness that hadn't left since the strange SUV encounter. Ethan had begun sleeping on the clinic floor, unwilling to risk a single hour away from the dog that now felt like a piece of his own soul. "His fever's back," Arlo said softly, as he approached with a tablet, "and it's rising fast." Ethan looked up. "I thought the surgery worked." "It did," Arlo replied, his tone gentle but firm. "But it was only part of the problem. His immune system is rejecting the tissue. It's rare in dogs unless—" "Unless what?" Arlo hesitated. "Unless they've been genetically modified beyond natural limits. His body doesn't know what it is anymore." There was a long pause. Ethan reached for Brio's paw, small and trembling in his palm. "I can keep him stable for now," Arlo continued, "but if we're going to save him long-term, we need to bring in a specialist. Someone with access to advanced cellular immunotherapy. Labs in Boston, maybe Chicago. And it won't be cheap. We're talking at least 10,000–12,000. Ethan exhaled slowly. The cost hit like a punch, but he didn't ask if it was worth it. He already knew. "And Nova?" he asked. Arlo turned the tablet so Ethan could see the screen. On it was a string of gene sequences highlighted in red, labeled with cryptic project codes. Nova and all 3 pups carry a rare genetic marker, an artificial strand. It's been inserted, not inherited. And it's only ever appeared in one database, a private archive once belonging to Biogenesis. Ethan didn't flinch. "So, she's proof." "She's more than that," Arlo said, lowering the screen. "She's the blueprint." Across town, in a crowded co-working space lit by buzzing fluorescents, Ben Rosario clicked a file attachment sent from an encrypted address. His heart sank as the video began to play. Grainy footage. A dimly lit kennel with metal bars and cement floors. A young Nova, clearly pregnant, backed into the corner of a cage, barking hoarsely. A man in a lab coat reached in with a pole, looped it around her neck, and yanked. She hit the ground hard, whimpering. Another technician entered with a clipboard, indifferent. A timestamp blinked in the corner. 18 months ago. Ben paused the video and stared at the still frame. He leaned back in his chair and ran a hand over his face, fury blooming behind his eyes. He knew what he had to do. That same evening, Liana sat in the conference room of Guardians of Four Paws, a nonprofit animal welfare organization housed in a converted fire station with brightly painted walls and the persistent scent of oatmeal dog shampoo. Beside her sat Veronica Wells, the organization's director, a tall, lean woman in her 50s with cropped silver hair, deep laugh lines, and eyes that didn't miss a thing. A former prosecutor who had turned her back on politics to advocate for the voiceless, Veronica had the presence of someone who didn't just walk into rooms, she occupied them. "What you're saying is huge," Veronica said, flipping through the stack of documents Liana had brought. "Illegal gene testing, evidence of abuse, and corporate front companies? This could topple an entire sector of private breeding. And we have living proof," Liana said. "Nova, the pups. One of them's fighting for his life." "We've already begun organizing a multi-state class action," Veronica replied. "If we can confirm Nova's DNA is traceable to biogenesis, she's more than a victim. She's the key to bringing this down." Liana handed over the video Ben had sent. Veronica's eyes darkened as she watched. "We'll bring this to the press by morning." Back at the clinic, Ethan sat in the small break room, a phone pressed to his ear. He had made a list. Old friends, past clients, his union contact, anyone who might help. But help was harder to come by than it used to be. "You want 12 grand to save a dog?" one voice had said. "That's a tough sell, Ethan." But not everyone turned him down. An old woman named Mrs. Ramirez, who had once brought in a dying tabby for him to fix up 15 years ago, dropped off $200 in cash with a note that read, "For the shepherds with love." Others followed. One by one, they came. Arlo returned later that night holding an envelope thick with crumpled bills. "Somebody started a donation link," he said. "Ben posted the story. It's already at 4,000. Ethan looked down at Brio, whose eyes fluttered weakly open for a moment, then closed again. "Tell him to keep posting." By midnight, the story had gone viral. Not in the usual trivial way, but with momentum, purpose. People didn't just share it, they felt it. The image of Nova curled around her pups in the back of a van. The surveillance footage of her mistreatment. The trembling paw of a puppy who had no voice. These spread like fire across every platform. Influencers reposted it. Vets donated. Celebrities sent DMs offering help. The hashtag #JusticeForNova topped trends for nearly 8 hours straight. At Guardians of Four Paws, Veronica prepared a press conference. At the clinic, Arlo prepped for the next round of treatments. And Ethan? Ethan sat awake beside Nova and Brio, holding the pup's head in his lap, whispering stories he used to tell his son, about brave dogs, long roads, and how sometimes love was what made miracles happen. When the knock came at dawn, Ethan didn't flinch. He opened the door of the clinic to find a woman in a brown overcoat standing with a briefcase in one hand and a badge in the other. Special Agent Clara Owens, Department of Agriculture's Office of Animal Research Oversight. Early 40s, African American, athletic build, dark brown eyes that radiated skepticism and compassion in equal measure. "I'm here to discuss the dogs," she said. Ethan stepped aside. "Then come in. You'll want to see this for yourself." And as the sun finally broke through the clouds outside, it illuminated something more than just a room filled with machines and animals. It lit the first undeniable step toward justice. The Grand Municipal Courthouse of Cleveland stood like a fortress of old ideals. Its marble columns soaked in decades of trials, grievances, and fleeting glimpses of truth. That morning, its steps were crowded with reporters, activists holding signs, and curious onlookers drawn in by the firestorm of headlines that had swept across the nation over the last week. In the middle of it all, flanked by legal volunteers and representatives from Guardians of Four Paws, stood Ethan Reed, his hands weathered, his coat too big around the shoulders, and his resolve as solid as the stone beneath his boots. At his side, Liana Tran, ever composed in her navy blazer and practical flats, held a thick file under one arm. Her eyes, dark and steady, scanned the growing crowd as they waited for the court officer to open the doors. She had barely slept. The last few days had been a blur of preparing affidavits, verifying medical evidence, and answering nonstop media calls. But standing beside Ethan and the growing army of voices speaking for Nova, she didn't feel tired. She felt ready. Ben says they're sending a top-shelf defense team, Liana said quietly. Ethan gave a humorless smile. Doesn't matter what suit you wear when the truth's on your collar. Nova wasn't with them. She was still at the animal hospital, watching over Brio, who had stabilized but remained under intensive care. Nova had refused to eat unless she was in the same room as him, and the clinic had relented after her pacing had nearly destroyed a kennel door. The staff called it loyalty. Ethan called it survival. She had spent too long guarding things no one else cared about to give up now. Inside the courthouse, Veronica Wells, director of Guardians of Four Paws, prepared their team. In her tailored black pantsuit, steel gray pixie cut sharp against the courtroom lighting, she looked every inch the ex-prosecutor she once was. Her voice carried authority as she assigned witness order and coordinated with the legal team, which included Marcy Dale, a tenacious animal rights attorney with freckles and thick glasses that magnified eyes that missed nothing. The opposing counsel arrived next. 4 men and women in slick suits led by Harlan Fisk, a tall, bald man with a sculpted jaw and a stare cold enough to stop traffic. He had defended corporate giants and crushed whistleblowers for years. Today he looked slightly amused, until Ben Rosario entered the courtroom carrying a flash drive and a worn manila folder bursting with documents. Ben gave him a curt nod before taking his seat near the front. Hunched forward, the scars of 1,000 deadlines stitched into the creases on his forehead. The judge, Honorable Miriam Adler, took the bench with practiced grace. A woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled tightly into a bun and a reputation for being fiercely fair, but unimpressed by theatrics. Her piercing green eyes swept the room like searchlights. "We are here today," she said, "to determine the admissibility and merits of the preliminary charges against Biogenesis Pet Labs with respect to alleged unlawful genetic experimentation, animal cruelty, and insurance fraud," it began. As testimony unfolded, so did the truth. First came the veterinary records from Arlo Nguyen, presented calmly and clearly, his voice even as he outlined the biological abnormalities in Nova and her pups, the existence of the experimental genetic markers, and the failed immune responses consistent with forced gene editing. Next, Liana took the stand. Her voice never wavered as she described the patterns of unexplained canine deaths in her hospital, the leaked procurement forms, and her mother's termination from Biogenesis's partner lab. She ended her testimony by holding up the collar that once belonged to Nova, still bearing the faint imprint of the BG Lab symbol. Then came the video. Ben queued it up. The footage flickered to life on the courtroom screen. The grainy hallway, the kennel. Nova, pregnant and terrified, dragged by the neck while a technician jotted notes without glancing up. Audible gasps rippled through the courtroom. Fisk objected. "Your Honor, the authenticity of this footage—" "Verified by 3 independent forensic analysts," Marcy Dale interrupted, holding up certification documents, "and tied to timestamps matching Biogenesis's own inventory logs." "Overruled," Judge Adler said, her voice firm. "Proceed." The silence after the video ended was deafening. Then, the bailiff called the next witness. Owen Malley, late 60s, with wispy white hair and a slight tremor in his left hand, walked slowly to the stand. He wore an old brown coat over his dress shirt, the collar frayed, the buttons mismatched. A man who looked like he'd spent his life in the shadows and was only now stepping into the light. "I was a kennel technician at Biogenesis," he began. "I worked there for 13 years. He spoke slowly, each word weighed and deliberate. He described the training he'd received, the procedures meant to calm dogs who were deemed non-compliant. How they were told never to ask about genetics, only to follow instructions. How shipments came in at night and dogs left without records. And finally, how one day he found Nova. She was different, he said. Smarter, more protective. They said she wasn't viable anymore, that she'd failed the project. I was supposed to log her for disposal." Owen paused, his voice catching. "I couldn't do it. So I swapped her chip with a blank one, damaged it with heat, and placed her in a transport cage marked for relocation. I thought maybe someone would find her before the end." "And did anyone at Biogenesis know you did this?" Marcy asked. "No. If they had, I'd probably be missing by now." By the end of the hearing, the defense had only managed to cast weak doubt on the timeline. Fisk's confidence eroded by the sheer weight of corroborated evidence. The judge called for a recess and announced that formal charges would proceed. The room erupted outside the courtroom, cameras flashing, journalists shouting questions, activists hugging. Inside, Ethan remained seated, his hands gripping his knees. He wasn't smiling. He didn't cheer. But when Liana sat beside him and placed a hand over his, he turned to her with tired eyes and nodded once. "It's not over," she said. "No," he agreed, "but they can't hide anymore." Back at the hospital, Nova pressed her body closer to Brio's kennel, her breathing even, ears flicking at every movement. A vet tech named Sarah, a tall and lean woman in her early 40s with thick-framed glasses and a gentle demeanor worn into her like river stone, knelt to offer Nova a bowl of food. Sarah had worked in animal trauma recovery for over a decade, having entered the field after losing her own dog in a laboratory fire caused by negligence. She moved slowly, respectfully, whispering to Nova as one would to a child. "She's gonna be okay," she said softly, placing the bowl down. "So is he." Nova didn't move toward the food. She kept her eyes on Brio, unmoving, unwavering. Outside the hospital, Ben uploaded the hearing footage to multiple platforms. Donations surged, volunteers signed up. More ex-employees of Biogenesis reached out. More records surfaced. And somewhere in a dark office behind a blackened glass tower, a group of executives realized too late. The truth wasn't just revealed, it was roaring. The verdict came on a windless spring morning, when the first signs of green began to reappear on Cleveland's tired branches, and the air no longer bit with winter's teeth. Outside the courthouse, beneath a pale sky, cameras rolled and reporters jostled for position. The seal was broken on an era of silence. Biogenesis Pet Labs, once a name known only in coded ledgers and patent filings, was officially dissolved. By court order, all its assets were seized, its facilities shuttered, and its leadership disbarred from future work involving live animals. The ruling mandated the creation of a national fund to aid in the rescue, rehabilitation, and long-term care of animals affected by experimental practices. The fund's name, chosen by unanimous petition, was the Nova Initiative. Inside a modest hospital room 2 miles away, Ethan Reed leaned against the frame of a large kennel, arms crossed loosely over his chest, watching Brio chase his own tail in circles. The pup had recovered beyond anyone's expectations. His eyes were bright, his ribs no longer visible, and the tiny scar on his side was the only reminder of the surgeries he'd endured. He barked once, sharp and joyous, before tackling a soft, squeaky toy shaped like a squirrel. Nova watched him from a few feet away, lying comfortably on a thick bed of blankets. Her fur had grown lush and healthy, the stiffness in her back leg now barely noticeable. She still kept a protective eye on her pups, but the haunted look in her eyes had softened, replaced by something gentler. Wary, perhaps, but no longer wounded. Ethan knelt beside her, scratched behind her ears, and whispered, "We made it, girl. You kept him here." That evening, surrounded by friends, volunteers, and neighbors, Ethan stood in front of his small home, now freshly painted in soft forest green with white trim. A wooden sign had been staked into the ground beneath a hanging porch light. "Murphy Shelter," it read, in hand-carved letters. Murphy was his wife's family name, a quiet tribute to the woman who had once told him, over a rainy cup of diner coffee, that some people were meant to save broken things, not throw them away. Standing beside him was Veronica Wells, clipboard in hand, organizing donations and supply drop-offs. Her silver pixie cut caught the light, her eyes scanning the space like a general surveying a battlefield. A dozen people from Guardians of Four Paws were there too, unloading food, crates, and bedding. They weren't there for ceremony. They were building something. A small German Shepherd mix named Taco, rescued from a lab in Pennsylvania, watched Ethan warily before sniffing his boot and wagging his tail in short bursts. Taco was 7 months old, with one floppy ear and a slight limp, the result of underdeveloped bone structure from early cage confinement. He would be the first guest of the Murphy Shelter. On the other side of town, Liana Tran stood before a small crowd of city officials and community members at a ribbon-cutting ceremony outside her newly leased building. Once a dental office, now transformed into a canine rehabilitation center. The sign above the door read, "Paw and Purpose, Recovery for Rescued Dogs." Arlo Nguyen stood next to her, dressed not in a lab coat but a light blue windbreaker and khakis. He still walked with a limp, but his step had purpose. He had agreed to return to practice part-time, no longer for corporate clinics or forced quotas, but here, where each dog's name mattered more than their pedigree. Inside the building, gentle classical music played over speakers. Therapy crates lined the walls, each fitted with name tags and notes on behavioral status. On one crate, scribbled in neat print, it read, "Echo, anxious with men, loves yogurt." "Can you believe it?" Arlo said, eyeing the room with quiet pride. Liana smiled. "Not yesterday, but maybe today." Her mother, Mrs. Tran, now lived in an apartment above the clinic. The routine of feeding dogs, folding towels, and watching Nova wander the halls had worked like a balm. Her memory wasn't what it once was, but the tremors had lessened, and every so often she smiled at Nova like she was a long-lost friend. "She reminds me of one we had," she would murmur, petting Nova's head gently. "Big girl, loyal." And sometimes she would remember entire names, dates, even books she'd cataloged. Nova often rested near her feet, calm as a shadow. In a downtown theater 1 month later, under the banner of the National Journalism Awards, Ben Rosario sat in a black suit that didn't quite fit, tugging at the collar and looking increasingly uncomfortable as a spotlight swept the audience. And the nominee for Investigative Report of the Year, the announcer read, for his 3-part expose Those Who Were Left Behind, which uncovered the illegal operations of Biogenesis pet labs and catalyzed national reform. Ben Rosario. The crowd rose in applause. Ben stood, awkward and blinking, and took the stage. He didn't speak long. "This story wasn't mine," he said, voice catching slightly. "It belonged to a dog, and to a man who stopped his van one night when nobody else would have. Everything that followed was just us catching up." After the ceremony, he found Ethan waiting near the lobby, dressed in a clean button-down shirt, Nova lying calmly at his feet. She was wearing a blue collar now, and a small gold tag etched with Murphy Shelter, found, loved, protected. "You clean up well," Ben said, patting Nova's head. Ethan shrugged. "Don't get used to it." Weeks passed, spring bloomed fully. The Nova Initiative began fielding applications from shelters nationwide. Paw and Purpose filled its intake list, and Murphy Shelter, now listed on a community dog map, became known for one quiet rule: no dog was turned away without a bowl of warm food and a name. Every night, Brio slept curled at the foot of Ethan's bed, his once-failing heart now strong and steady. Sometimes, he would twitch in his dreams, paws kicking gently, chasing something bright and boundless, and when he did, Nova would rise from her spot by the window, nudge him gently, and lie beside him until the restlessness passed. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was a better one, because someone had stopped to listen to a cry in the dark. Because a dog had refused to let her children die. Because hope, when guarded fiercely enough, can take root in even the most fractured places and grow. Sometimes, God's greatest miracles don't come wrapped in light or thunder. They arrive quietly, in the form of a starving dog on the side of the road, a whimper in the night, a man who chooses to stop. Nova wasn't just a mother fighting for her pups. She was a whisper from heaven, reminding us that love still has a voice, even when the world forgets how to listen. Brio's heartbeat, once so fragile, now races with life. Not because science made it so, but because compassion did, because faith did. And maybe, just maybe, because God wasn't done with them yet. So, if you believe in second chances, if you've ever felt like giving up but didn't, then say a prayer tonight. Not just for Nova and Brio, but for every soul still waiting in the cold, every heart still chained by silence, and every hand brave enough to reach out. Comment Amen if you believe in miracles. Subscribe for more stories that restore your faith in the good. Share this video, and may God bless you and all who still choose love.